Ruben Schwartz here from Sales for Nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerds podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you. Tonight, I'm really excited to have with me Michael Katz, founder and chief penguin of Blue Penguin Development. And I've been reading Michael's stuff for years since somebody introduced us and really helped me with some of my thinking about consulting. And in addition to being a former corporate marketer, Michael has the distinction of being an award-winning humorist, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. And he's the founder of Blue Penguin, and he helps small professional services firms and solo entrepreneurs get more and better clients by positioning themselves as likable experts. And since launching Blue Penguin in 2000, which is now a very long time ago, Michael has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Business Week. He's been on Bloomberg TV, Forbes, Inc., USA Today, and other such publications. So, Michael, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
All right. What do you have in your glass?
I have actually a beer, not wine, and it's from a
Totally okay.
local brewery to me here in the Boston area called Jack's Abbey, and I like dark beer, and so it's called Smoke and Dagger.
So it's like a stout?
It's like, well, they call it a black lager, but I wouldn't quite. It's not quite a stout. It's not that heavy.
Okay.
But it's dark. It's not, it's sort of the other end of the spectrum from like Bud Light, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that can only be good.
It's good. I'm a big fan.
And I've got a glass of 2013 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon from Franciscan Vineyards. And for folks who are just coming off the Aaron Ross episode, you might remember that's exactly what I was drinking then. And what turns out, even though these are kind of far apart in terms of release, they're only recorded a day apart. So I had a glass yesterday with Aaron. I used my VacuVin wine saver and saved the rest of the bottle. And now I'm having another glass tonight with Michael. So, Michael, on your website, you say, I never intended to get into this business of helping small professional services firms. What did you intend to do?
Well, I should start by saying that there's no entrepreneurialness in my family. So my dad actually is sort of the epitome of the American dream. English wasn't even his first language. Child of immigrants, worked as a bank teller as his first job, and 30 years later was president of the bank. And then we're not risk takers in my family. I have an older brother who's a tenured college professor, another brother who's a partner in a law firm. So I was on the same kind of like slow and steady path. I went to college, went to business school, and had a couple of jobs, and then ended up working for a cable company, I'm sorry to say. But it was actually a nice place to work for about 12 years, and I pretty much thought I would just kind of keep moving along there. But a few things happened. One was the internet. So back in like the late 90s, everyone was starting new companies. And it's hard to believe, but you felt like you were missing out on having a job. 1988, 1998, 1999. And so there was this real lure to like do something. And I was involved in that in my job. So I had a kind of early look at it. The other thing was, I was there 12 years. My first few years in that company, every couple of years I'd get a promotion. I mean, just showing up on time put you ahead of half the people. And so it was good. But I got to the point after maybe 10 years where I was like, boy, I'm okay. I'm not going to get fired, but I'm kind of reaching my peak here in terms of my ability. I wasn't particularly good at managing people. And so a combination of that and like, gee, I got to get into this internet thing. I thought, boy, if I don't leave now, I'll be here forever. And so I just decided, the company was being bought at the time actually by AT&T, and I thought, I'm not working for AT&T. So I set the deadline, and it was either, as soon as the deal closed, I was going to leave, and it did. And I left a week later. And initially I was going to build websites for companies. because that was big back, in 1999, 2000. And
now, did you know a lot about websites then?
Well, I had been involved just by chance in building websites in my company, like the company website and a few others. So,
okay.
And as a business person who was not particularly technical, I was good at being like the bridge between the people who would build it and the people who would use it. And again, back then, it was a real gulf between those. You really had to kind of know stuff about, how the internet worked back then. So I was going to do that for companies, and that was my plan when I left.
Okay. And so how did that work out?
Not well. Well, my plan was that I wasn't going to build them. I was going to be sort of an architect. I was going to help you decide what kind of website you needed, and then I'd help you develop a plan. I'd done that a number of times at the company, and then you go off and find a guy to build your website. What I found was people didn't appreciate that added value and wanted to just go right to a company that would build a website. But I stumbled onto email newsletters, and my job in the company was very internet related. So when I had a job the last year or two, I just started sending this bulk email to people I worked with about the internet. I remember writing one about this company called Amazon where you could buy books. And I even did kind of classes through the HR department on the internet, people in the company. So I kept doing it when I left. I just would find interesting things. And it wasn't even a newsletter. There was no such thing. It was just a bulk email that I would send to, 40 people. And after I left, I kept doing it. And a few interesting things happened. First is people I'd never heard of asked to be added to the list, which today is common. But back then, it'd be like somebody you never heard of wanted to be added to your kids' distribution list or something. Like, who are you? But I was like, okay. But then I also found that people on the list would invite me to lunch or would invite me to speak. And it took me a little while, like a whole year. I wasn't trying to sell anything. I was just sharing useful information in a non-selling way because I wasn't trying. But it still accomplished the fact that people would call me.
Right.
And eventually people said, can you help us develop a newsletter? And so for about 10 years, that was my main focus, helping companies develop email newsletters. And I still have 7 or 8 clients that I do their newsletter.
Okay, and so this ended up being your business accidentally.
Totally accidentally. And it was a very good business. I mean, I don't do exclusively newsletters anymore, but it was a very good business for a number of reasons. I mean, one was it was a good combination of what I'm good at. It involved writing, but it also involved the same thing. It was sort of a little bit of technology kind of thing going. But also it's repeat business, which again, I didn't realize at the time. It was an accident, but having repeat business smooths the peaks and valleys. I still have 2 clients I've had for over 15 years.
And so you would help them month after month or however frequently their newsletter was, put it together and so on. And so, yeah, your sales and marketing investment in landing that client would pay off for 15 years or more.
Right.
In some cases.
That was very good because most solos, the biggest issue is the kind of feast or famine. You can't inventory your time. So that's a main issue for people like me.
And you didn't set out saying, gosh, feast or famine is the big problem. Let me intentionally design something to avoid that. It just kind of happened? Is that?
I wasn't even aware of that. Now when I talk to people, because now, the newsletters, at least half of my work is, I'm basically a marketing coach now.
Right.
Courses, I work one-on-one with people. And one of the things I'm always talking to people about is there a repeat opportunity with a client? And I don't know if we'll get into this level of detail, but even the way you structure an opportunity with a client. So, for example, with a newsletter, I charge people something up front to kind of build it and set it up. Charge them on a monthly basis to do the newsletter. Well, I also realized eventually that you want to charge something. Because if I scare you away based on that price, I just gave away the next 15 years of income. So you have to make sure that it's a real razor scenario. I don't recommend you give away the setup, but when I advise people on doing this kind of business, I'm always saying, you got to find the sweet spot where people will pay you to do the upfront work, but what you really want is the company that'll keep you going for month after month, for year after year.
Right. And I don't know if you've experienced this. I've experimented with all kinds of different things in terms of setup versus month over month. And even things like, well, what if I do the setup for free? And then I often find that people don't actually pay attention and value it. It's like you have to charge something almost to get people's head in the game.
Right.
But like you say, it's not necessarily, that's not where you're trying to make your money.
Right. And I think it varies by what you're selling. I charge less now for setup than I did 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, people were desperate to get a newsletter, maybe, or let's say 8 years ago. Now, for a number of reasons, it's not as urgent because everybody's facing social media. So I've dropped the price on the front end because it's almost like they don't appreciate its value until they see it.
Right.
In 2005, they didn't care. It's like social media. They just wanted it. They couldn't even tell you why.
Right.
Today, what happens is I need to sort of bring them in. They see the value, and then they keep going. But it evolves, over time.
So a lot of folks have these newsletters, right? And there's so many tools out there that make it easy to handle the technological side of sending out a newsletter and measuring responses and so on. But I mean, really, a lot of these newsletters are not very good. Jill Conrath was on here a few episodes ago, and she was talking about how she unsubscribed from 900-something newsletters. And I don't know how I've unsubscribed from a few hundred, but I still get a ton of them. And some of them are great. Yours, right, for example. That's why we're having this conversation. But what do people do wrong with their newsletters, or what should they be doing that they're not?
Well, the interesting thing is the fundamentals and the mistakes haven't changed in 15 years.
Okay.
So the biggest mistake is it's focused on the people of the company and not on the end user. So it's a front-loaded process for me. So I spend a lot of time. I'm working with a client right now. It's probably going to launch their newsletter tomorrow. And so we spend a lot of time talking about, well, who's your target audience and what makes you different and what do you know that they don't know that they'd want to read every month. And it's always interesting that in those discussions, you get a lot of blank stares like, oh, we hadn't really thought about what do they want to know. All we think about is what do we want to tell them.
Right.
To me, the biggest thing about a newsletter is because you can unsubscribe anytime you want and because you've got all these options, that your ticket of entry is somebody has to want to get it. Which, again, sounds so obvious, but, they don't sit there at Sports Illustrated talking about what they're doing at Time Warner because you don't care. They talk about sports. So it's the same. So I always talk about it as we're producing a magazine. Another mistake I find is companies pay too much attention to how long should your subject line be and what time of day do you publish. And that matters. But again, you subscribe to a newspaper or magazine or a movie because of the content, not because of what the masthead looks like. And I find people tend to fixate on that kind of thing and forget, again, the point, which is that the recipient can delete it anytime they want. So it's, again, I had the same discussions 15 years because it's the same problem.
Well, in some ways, I feel like it's a bigger problem because so many people want you to subscribe or they auto-subscribe you, and you've got social media, and you've got this, that, and the other thing. Like the competition for our attention is much more intense than it was 10, 15 years ago. It's like you have to be that much better just to stay in the same place.
I totally agree. I mean, 15 years ago, newsletters were the way apps are on your phone. Like you don't put every app on earth on your phone, but you're kind of vaguely always trolling for what's the newest app that's kind of cool.
Right.
That's how it was with email. People were looking for newsletters to subscribe to.
What?
Now it's like the worst thing that could happen to me is I find a new good thing I now feel like I should read. So I agree. There's all this competition. The bar has gotten much higher. The thing is, though, my focus and my entire marketing focus is basically pay attention to the people you already know. So yes, I want strangers to show up. But what I'm always looking for, and it's true of any individual or company, we all have kind of a list of people on earth that we know. We just don't stay in touch with them. So you and I know each other because we know somebody in common. You didn't just show up out of the blue. So it's only because I was in touch with that person and he was in touch with you that we're connected. So to me, a newsletter is just a sort of systematic way of networking. So, yes, there's competition, but it's not. I try and game the system, and I'm gaming the system because I'm connecting with people I already know. So you're more likely to pay attention to me, as opposed to just some stranger out on the internet. So it's a numbers game in some ways, because the more subscribers, the better. But in terms of the marketing tool, if you can just stay in touch with the 500 people you know on Earth, assuming you're a solo, that's all you need. So I used to work with big companies, but I find I enjoy helping small companies compete with their big competitors. I don't know why, but I just sort of like that. And so this whole relationship building thing, it's a real advantage if you're small. It's really hard for Verizon to truly have a relationship with you. What do you do to stay in touch with the people you already know? The answer is usually nothing. And so that's the big missed opportunity. And a newsletter or email or even, calling people up and saying, how you doing, is really good marketing.
Now, a lot of folks would say, okay, that's great, but whatever I do, it's so boring that I can't figure out how to talk about it in a way that's interesting. What should they be doing that's going to actually be like, okay, I know I don't want to write about Time Warner, that's why I don't write anything, or that's why I have a crappy newsletter or whatever. Right? How do they get to talking about sports?
Right. Well, a couple things. One is, so it's broader than newsletters. I mean, again, that was my focus for a long time, but that's only one example of staying in touch with people you know. So first off, half the game is just, can you stay in touch with people you know on any level? One of the things I do marketing courses and stuff. So one of the things I have people do is they get a handle on who do they know. And again, I find the average middle-aged person, it's like 500 people. My definition of who do you know is, if you called them up or emailed them, you wouldn't have to introduce yourself. They know who you are. And simply by doing things like saying twice a year, I'm going to email Ruben to go, hey, how's it going down there in Austin? It's really cold up here in Boston. On this and that. How's your kids? See ya. Now, that sounds so stupid and obvious. How could that possibly work? The thing is, most people never do that. People like that at sort of the fringes of your relationship are likely to bring other people your way because you're top of mind. So I always say, you need three things to get hired as a professional. I should say, I only work with people who sell professional service. Financial planners, consultants, coaches, recruiters. So I don't work with people who sell stuff. I think if you're selling a pair of sneakers, it comes down more to the sneakers than the relationship. Not that doesn't matter. But if you're a financial planner, it's nearly all relationship because they all sell the same exact thing. So to me, you need three things. One is, I need to believe you're good at what you do. So part of that is publishing content and, commenting on stuff and all that. The website looks professional. Second is, I need to like you, which matters. If I said, do you like your doctor? It's not because you have any idea where she went to medical school or how good she is medically. You don't have the slightest idea. It's I don't know, she talks to me and, they're nice to me. But that matters. People choose professionals. And the last is you have to be top of mind. So when somebody says, gee, I need someone to help me solve this computer problem. And this is true not just of B2C, but B2B too. People say, who do you know who can solve this? And now they start asking around. And so this word of mouth thing really matters. So anyway, that's the relationship building. But on your question of how do you make it interesting, I'm big on the idea that you need to combine personal stories with the useful information. Because for one thing, it's way more interesting. If I tell you a story about my dog and I say, you know what? Just like my dog likes to fetch a ball, your IT project needs to include a ball. I don't know. But it makes it much more interesting. And the other thing is, my technical knowledge in whatever field I'm in, IT, finance, coaching, recruiting, again, is nearly identical to my competition. You don't really know anything that everyone else knows. But I'm the only one whose dog likes to walk counterclockwise around the house carrying an old tetherball. So when I tell you that story, people connect on a personal level. And again, you have to give them something useful. But the combination, which again, I stumbled on kind of accidentally because I like telling stories, but they feel like they know you. Because, I went to business school. I worked for a huge company where marketing was a numbers thing. We didn't didn't talk about relationship. I worked for the cable company. It was like, how do we barrage you with, ads to buy HBO? So when I found myself working on my own, I was surprised how much it mattered whether people liked you and remembered you in getting hired. And so these stories that I always emphasize people tell, whether you're doing a presentation or you're writing a newsletter or even stuff on your website, like my bio page on my website has a bunch of pictures of me with my daughter as she's growing up. It's not business related, but you know what? People say, hey, my daughter is, 21 or, whatever. And that's how people make connections. And what I discovered was that's how marketing works.
Right. And I notice your title is Chief Penguin, right? It's not CEO or Chief Executive or whatever. It's Chief Penguin.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. My best marketing things were all accidents, including most of my children. No, I'm just kidding. So when I was going to name my company, first I was going to call it michaelkatz.com because in 2000, but then I was like kind of sick of my name right out of the gate. It's like, it's too much. So I just thought, I can do whatever I want. And I like penguins, and I thought of calling it flying penguin, bald penguin. But you know what's interesting? Even though that has absolutely nothing to do with what I do, it's very memorable. I mean, my office looks like the gift shop at the aquarium. Everyone gives me penguins. So it's from just a sort of thing to remember and talk about. It's way better than if I called it, Katz and Associates or, Marketing Solutions or whatever. I find that, again, I work with tiny companies and individuals. There's this assumption that because this is the way McDonald's or Nike markets, that this is what I should do. So people obsess over their logo, their tagline. And I'm always saying, look, McDonald's is going to spend like $50 million on their tagline. No one but you, and maybe not even you, is going to remember it. Doesn't matter. Like, yes, you have to be over the bar of professionalism, that you don't look homemade and like you just woke up yesterday and went into business. But that's not how it works. What matters is you're in front of people and they like you and you seem to know what you're talking about. And if you can make those things happen, then people come to you and refer people to you. And that's the biggest barrier when you're working alone or in a small company. How do you get enough clients?
Well, I don't know, when did Seth Godin come out with his Purple Cow book? I have a feeling that you were first with Blue Penguin, weren't you?
Well, I may have beat him on Blue Penguin and Purple Cow, but it's funny because I just referenced his book. I mean, I love Seth Godin's stuff, but I'm so sorry he doesn't really do marketing anymore because that man's a genius in marketing. I think Purple Cow, the idea that you need to be, as he would say, remarkable, that people would remark on you, I think that's the key. In fact, there's some really good examples, like I don't know if you have them down there, the guys who are Men in Kilts, who is a window cleaning company, and they all show up in kilts no matter the weather.
No, well, as far as I know, we don't have them. Maybe we do. I've never seen them.
That's a great example of nothing to do with cleaning windows, but you kind of want them to come over just to see if they really do it. So that's like a brilliant example of marketing. It's that's a Seth Godin Purple Cow kind of example.
But I think you've got to take a little credit because really there's no conceptual difference between a Purple Cow and a Blue Penguin.
You're right. Well, I have to say that Godin's been in my shadow for a long time. I'm getting a little tired of
it. Seth, if you're listening, come on the show and defend yourself. That's great. And so then, how did you decide, hey, I'm going to call myself Chief Penguin?
This is another thing. I wouldn't say it was an accident. It was more of a sort of an awakening in a sense that, again, I sort of humor is like my main thing. So that's like if you ask people who know me, like to describe me, that would come out pretty much in everything, work or whatever. But I kind of had to not keep it under wraps when I had a job, but I'd say it was irrelevant.
Right.
It'd be like if you're like being a 6'9" baseball player. Like it's kind of interesting, but it's not really, it doesn't really matter. That was me and my company. And so when I first left, like most people who start a company, you're really worried about being taken seriously and professionalism. And friends are telling you, you can't fool around here. So I kept it in for a while, but what I would find was every time I'd let out a little bit of sort of something funny or irreverent, it would connect with people. And so now I'm glad you like my newsletter, but I'm sure it's for that kind of thing more than my actual insights. Because there too, my marketing insights are probably the same as many other people. The remarkableness of what I'm doing, it's probably funnier than what you usually read. So I think there's a lot of getting comfortable with whatever it is makes you different and making that the sort of central point of what you do. So the Chief Penguin thing was just something I thought of one day, but I've had so many people comment. And occasionally, it's funny, occasionally when someone like reprints an article or, puts me in their program for an event, they want to, sometimes without my permission, they'll call me like president because they're concerned that it looks too weird. But I think, to me, that's my differentiator.
Don't worry, we will list you as Chief Penguin. And you know what? When I list my Sales for Nerds affiliation, it's Chief Nerd.
Right. I think that's good.
Well, it's funny. I remember when I started consulting, I modeled my website after some giant consulting company I think is no longer in business. It was like all this terrible stuff that you should never do. And it was like I sort of had this notion of I'm embarrassed to be. I started out by myself, and then we were a boutique, and we were always tiny. And so I sort of defaulted to this corporate image that I thought was what people wanted. And it took me forever to realize that if people wanted that, they could see right through my BS, and they weren't going to hire me anyway. What people wanted was the alternative to those giant companies. That's the reason they would hire us. And so I've sort of flipped it around. So like now let's default to being a person.
Yeah, it's really, I think so much of marketing as a small company is not becoming something you're not. It's losing the facade, which is scary. You're afraid that people are going to, not take you seriously. Your brother-in-law with the Harvard MBA tells you, don't do that. All your well-meaning friends and family, and I have this with clients all the time. In fact, I said it to the company today who's about to launch their newsletter, because I always have us send out to about 15 people, friends, family, colleagues, a test just to make sure it works on different platforms. And I said, don't ask them what do they think of your newsletter. Their only job is to see if it's broken, if the links don't work or something, because people are always trying to keep you from saying anything potentially controversial or embarrassing or Chief Penguin. And I'm pushing people the other way, saying, everybody wants to stand out, but they want to do it by looking the same. So I spent a lot of time kind of pushing people away from looking the same.
It's like a bunch of middle-aged people being teenagers again, right? They're all rebelling together. Yeah,
particularly if you're new at what you're doing. That's when it's at its height. Because, I remember when I left a company, when you work for a company that's a brand name company and you're, vice president of whatever, you feel like you have a certain impact behind you. And now you go off and you're like Chief Penguin at some company. So everyone, regardless of qualifications, almost without exception, doubts themselves for at least 6 months.
Right.
And so you end up just trying to look like all the other people in your profession, which again is kind of the opposite of marketing.
And so, all of this stuff makes a lot of sense, right? And maybe some people would disagree, but I think most people are going to be nodding their heads saying, yeah, that totally makes sense. I totally want to do that. But gosh, I feel like I am like everyone else. How do I discover my Chief Penguinism or whatever?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to do by yourself.
Okay.
It's the stuff that comes naturally to you probably don't even notice. So it might be some aspect of your, sort of personality or something like that. I'm also big on the idea that you ought to be as narrow as possible in terms of having a niche. So same thing. There's this assumption, which makes sense. It's just not correct, that the broader I am, the more chances I have to get hired. So I'm working with a woman right now who's she helps parents choose the right private school for their kids. She's going to focus on helping people who are relocating to Boston choose the right private school for their kids. Way smaller market. The thing is, If you're relocating to Boston and you want to send your kids to private school and you hear about her, like, you have to call her. So the logical person would say, don't do that. You're limiting your options. But as a practical matter, you know, what does she need? 20 clients a year? A lot of people that I deliberately badger to narrow their focus. It's easier if you narrow your focus. I mean, when I did newsletters for that time, I was the only guy doing newsletters like that. And so it was very easy for people to assume I was the expert because of the niche. And the truth is, after a while, you do become expert because that's all you're paying attention to. And the guy who's doing, you know, marketing in general kind of can't keep up with you because there's too many things he has to know. So I find, again, if I were going to say, what are the things that matter in terms of marketing yourself, this idea of, you know, narrowing your focus, working on your relationships, selling something where there's an actual demand for it, which again sounds obvious, but when you're working without a budget in a word of mouth world as a small company, it does come down to all these kind of very logical truths. But it's sort of like exercise. Like, we all know you're supposed to exercise. How come everybody doesn't do it? It's the same thing. Like, we know this. It's just when you actually say to people, well, so what are you doing in this way? It's like, oh, nothing.
Having my heart medication.
Yeah, there you go. So, anyway, it's obvious, but it's hard to do. And I'd also say that because none of us have a big budget, you have to do it regularly. You can't just, it's like you can go, in the old days, you could go hire some firm that would market for you. Now that it's all social media and all that, it's kind of become a contact sport. It's hard to outsource it to somebody else. And they stop marketing, then things get quiet.
Well, and that's what I hear time and time again, right? Somebody finally gets over the hump to activate and start marketing and blogging or newslettering or whatever. And then they do it for a couple months, they don't see results, and whether it's they get tired of not seeing results or crises happen and they fall off the wagon, so to speak. How much time should people be devoting to this, and what kind of frequency is the right frequency?
Well, the sort of normal, rule of thumb is always 20% of your time should be marketing. So that's not a bad number. That's right, 1 day a week. But it doesn't happen all in one day. So I think it gets mixed into everything we do. I mean, your marketing, again, if you want to use the exercise analogy, you need to exercise regularly. But it can't take over your life. You can't spend 4 hours at the gym. You're wasting your time to go to the gym once a month. You may as well not do it. Plus, it's really painful. If you go to the gym all the time, not only is it easy, if you kind of miss it if you don't do it. I think marketing is the same way. So I don't recommend you sit down on every Friday and market. But I do recommend, and I work with people on, what's your plan going to be? So I'm going to send this many emails a day, make this many phone calls, publish a newsletter. It has to be manageable. It can't take over your life. But it needs to be regular, and you need to do it whether you've got a lot of clients and business or not. Well, every market's when they don't have clients, but then when they get busy, they stop. I'm standing over them going, how come you're not here at the gym with me? Like, where's your newsletter? And the bigger the company, the harder it is because there's too many competing things going on. So I feel like half the value I have for my newsletter clients is I make sure their newsletter gets published every month, because if I'm not there, it won't happen.
And is once a month okay?
Well, I've experimented with a lot of different things. I found, to me, the optimal is actually every other week. But for most people, that'll kill you. Like, that's hard to do. I do it every other week, but I don't have anything else to do. But for most people who don't particularly I love writing, so it's like easy for me. But once a month, though, I used to say to people again 15 years ago, hey, you publish once a month, and that's your whole marketing plan. Today, I look at once a month for a newsletter as that's the minimum, because there's so much going on every day. But the thing about a newsletter is, it's not just, in the old days, you'd send it as an email, And then that was it. So then you send it as an email, you put it out on social media, you excerpt pieces of it throughout the month. I published a book that was just 29 old newsletters. So speaking of Seth Godin, I was thinking, boy, it's like 10 years ago. I remember thinking, is it okay for me to publish a book that's just old newsletters, essentially? And then Seth Godin published a book that was like 400 past blogs. And all he did was alphabetize them by the, oh, geez, if he can do this. But the thing is, when you're publishing on a regular basis, not only is that newsletter in front of people, you're creating content. You can use it all kinds of different ways. So it becomes the basis of so many things, podcasts, And again, it's more than just newsletters. It's the whole stay in touch with that magic 500 people.
Right. Okay.
You don't have to be a good writer or anything. You just have to be a good relationship builder. So
let me ask you a direct question. If I'm sending a newsletter out once a week, can I go to every other week without doing something terrible? Again, it could, your mileage may vary, but I found that I have a friend who publishes every week, and this guy's been doing it longer than I have, and he's a machine. But I find the pace of every other week is good because you get like a week off. Right. And it's funny. Some people think I publish every week. Some people think I publish monthly. I mean, these are people who are like avid readers. So I don't think you lose a lot when you go to every other week from every week, because the weeks really go by fast for the readers. But if you go to a month, that seems to me that's a long time. I mean, a newsletter is a way to it does so many things, but one thing it does is those prospective clients where you're like, how many emails can you send going, checking in? Well, if they're on your newsletter list and it's coming out every 2 weeks and I can see who's opening it, I'll see those prospects reading it. And I'm like, okay, I'm in front of that guy. He keeps seeing me out there. So anyway, I find every 2 weeks is pretty good. So, I want to thank you right now because you've just saved me a bunch of work and a bunch of stress, because I was one of those people who fell off the wagon and then went monthly. And then if I go monthly, that's too long, like not just for the audience, I think, but for me, like I'll just forget about it. So I made myself do weekly, but it's a lot of stress and I feel like the quality suffers. So if I can go to every other week, I feel like I can do a better job for the readers with less stress for me. So thank you so much. You're welcome. And you got to pick a pace also that you can live with sort of theoretically forever. Right. And so and I also always say that newsletters are great for a lot of reasons, but if you hate writing, it's just not the right tool for you. Maybe it's podcasts, or maybe it's, special reports or something. Or I know some people who just make a lot of phone calls. So you got to find that, again, back to the exercise thing. I could tell you all day that swimming is the best exercise there is, but if you hate it, you're not going to do it. So you got to pick the thing that you like so that, at least it's tolerable. I think it's the same thing here. And that's what Aaron Ross and I were just talking about. He has this concept of you got to pick one marketing cake, which is the thing that you actually look forward to eating. Right. And then you can do everything else as the icing. You can take that cake and repurpose it in different ways, but if you try to do everything, you're going to be miserable. Right. I thought that was a great analogy. If it was just actually eating cake, but I don't think. Watch, we're going to find somebody on YouTube who makes like $1 million a year posting videos of themselves eating cake. That's right. So I know that you're not just newsletters. What other stuff should people be thinking about in terms of their marketing persona and their marketing efforts? Well, my mantra is stay in front of the people you know over and over again in a way that positions you as a likable expert. So it's people you know. So it's great if somebody Googles you and does a search and finds you, but I don't pay any attention to SEO. I focus on the people I know over and over again. So you need a way to have an ongoing connection with people, whether you're publishing regularly, you're emailing, you're having coffee. So, for example, it's great to be a speaker at a big event, but unless you found a way to turn that into newsletter subscribers or relationships, you're like the best guy there is for one day. Or like, I'm amazed at the number of people who just work and work to be quoted in the newspaper.
You get quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and the phone rings off the hook for 2 days, and then it's right back to where you were again. Because
and you know from personal experience,
there's no repetition in it. And they're strangers. So it's fun. It doesn't do anything for you. And then the last thing is this, I always use the concept, the phrase likable expert, because I think people do need to believe you're really good at what you do. And I think publishing content and, having an opinion and all that is good. But I found the likable part really matters. And that comes down to a bunch of things like returning phone calls from people who ask a question or, complimenting people on their newsletter. I mean, again, it's so funny, but I know consultants who never pick the phone up and won't talk to someone unless that person appears to be a prospective client because they think it's somehow more efficient that way. I love talking to people who ask a question specifically because they're not in a position to hire me. If you talk to that guy who just got laid off or that student who has some questions and you help them, they'll remember you and they send people back your way. Like I do believe it all comes back to you. So the likable part really matters because, again, the expert part, all your competitors share in equal measure.
And it's more fun to be a decent person, I think, than some kind of consulting robot that, is attempting to algorithmically optimize who you respond to and who you don't.
Or at least pretend you're a decent person.
At least try, right?
At least try. Yes. It's funny. It's just a combination of stuff. I do think that it's like, I don't know, before I went off and worked for myself, I was two distinct people. Like there was the work version and the personal version. And the work was like, the bottom line, and it was a public company and all that. And what I found is that the more they merged into one person, the better my marketing was. And it's easier. You don't have to remember who you're supposed to be. And I think people respond to that because there are so many people who just are, tending to be the corporate person. And big companies, it's just hard for a big company to be personal. There's too many people involved.
Yeah. And then you get to, like you say, you get to have more fun. You don't have to try to put on a mask to go to work. You get to go to work and be part of you, and you don't have to take the mask off when you get home.
Right. And believe me, I could use a mask. As you can see.
Well, it goes for both of us. Cheers to that.
Right.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for your time. This has been super useful to me. You've totally reduced my workload, and I think I'm going to deliver better results for people as a result. And I hope it's useful for listeners as well. Cheers.
And if you come to Boston, Jack's Abbey in Framingham.
All right. We will get a picture of that on the website.